We are, just under 3 weeks to Freedom Day, the 21st of June, when we're supposed to get rid of all of the restrictions. Well, never mind. The Prime Minister said it was the earliest possible date. He's always said in recent weeks that we are on the roadmap, and he's seen nothing to shake him away from that roadmap so far. And indeed, given that when Sage gave their best case and worst case and medium case scenarios for what would happen when we started to unlock, including after May the 17th, people meeting indoors, pubs and restaurants opening indoors, even their best case scenario of how the best it could be. Well, we're actually below that in terms of hospitalisations and deaths and cases. We're doing just fine, thank you, despite this new Indian variant, despite the fact that on Sunday we reported 0 deaths from COVID, and on Monday 1 death from COVID across the whole country. Bearing in mind those deaths numbers will go up a little bit over the next few days because, of course, we know there's a variation on different days of the week. But despite all of that, and the rollout of the vaccine to all and sundry across the country on a huge scale, we're still told we might have a third wave and we might need to lock down for longer. But is that the case, really? Well, let's talk to Professor Hugh Pennington. He's Emeritus Professor of Bacteriology at Aberdeen University and joins us once again. Good morning to you, Hugh.
Morning, Julie.
Do you agree with the scientists who say, oh, well, we're not sure, could be a bit risky getting rid of the rule of 6 and letting people end social distancing, and we should probably hold off on that just in case?
I'm a bit of a skeptic. I think, what we're measuring as a number of cases is not strictly speaking cases. It's people who are showing signs of infection. Which is really quite different because many people, particularly younger people, don't really have an illness to speak of. They wouldn't go and see a GP if they had an infection, but they're being picked up by testing. And I think we have to separate them from what we were seeing, a year ago and more, when people were really desperately sick. They were in hospital, they were being tested, and unfortunately, quite a few of them died. Now, we're not seeing that because of the vaccine program. So anybody who says there's going to be a third wave has to really say, well, what do they mean by that? Is this just an uptick in the number of actual infections or an uptick in the number of illnesses caused by the virus? And clearly, if it's going to be the second, one has to start saying, well, has the vaccination program worked? Because the vaccination program has got really 2 aims. One is, the first one, the most important one by far, is to save lives and stop the intensive care units being overwhelmed by the COVID cases and all that kind of thing. And it's, the very, very strong impression one gets is it's been very successful in that. The second arm of the vaccination program was to pick up the people who are not going to fall seriously ill, but to stop the transmission of the virus in the younger people. And there's always been worry about that. Why should younger people get vaccinated? Because it's not to protect them necessarily from being ill. It's to protect the population from them getting infected and passing the virus on to their grandparents and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, the grandparents are protected. So I think to say there's going to be a third wave, well, there might be an uptick in the number of actual positive cases of the virus, but to say that is a third wave like the second wave and the first wave, I think is very misleading.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because we're going to keep having peaks and troughs of this, as we do with flu, with the vaccine for flu, and we will no doubt have another wave of some kind in the winter certainly in terms of cases going up, but the argument right now is that, yes, we don't know, this could get worse. And of course, we know that with this, with the way that this virus can replicate, that we, things can get very nasty very quickly. But that would involve an awful lot of people who haven't been vaccinated, or an awful lot of people who have not been protected by the vaccine. And we know that it hasn't got full protection, getting infected, getting very seriously ill and ending up in hospital. But from what we know about the protection, it does actually protect from death and largely from hospitalisation. The main thing it doesn't protect from is getting the virus. And given that those who have had 2 jabs are as protected as anyone is ever going to be. That's it. That's as much protection as we're going to get right now. Maybe a booster in the autumn for those who are very highly at risk. But there does come a point when we have to say, well, this is as good as it gets. And yes, some people are going to sadly get this virus and will die. And that's very terrible. But we don't lock down every year because of flu and people get a flu virus and die. We've got a vaccine that to all intents and purposes, has made COVID as equivalent in lots of ways for older people to the flu in terms of risk. At some point, there has to be a point when we just say, we've done everything we can. Off you go, everybody. We get back to normal life with people knowing the precautions they can take to keep themselves safe. So if they want to just see grandchildren or whatever outdoors, that might be a sensible thing for them to do. But there shouldn't be a law about it.
That's right. I think that's we're getting very close to that situation, in my opinion, if we're not even there already, that basically, and what we have, of course, are localized outbreaks. And if the virus persists, that's what we'll have, because this virus specializes in causing localized outbreaks, even with the Indian variant. We know that most of the people who are infected with it don't infect anybody else. A few infect a lot of people. They're super spreader events, and what we have to do is to have a contact tracing system that's really good at knocking these super spreader events on the head. And we've done that actually in the UK. We did that last year. I'm speaking of Aberdeen, where we had a big pub outbreak, mostly young people. As far as I know, nobody really came to any serious harm as a consequence. But we closed the pubs for 3 weeks because of a particular issue, and that sorted out that particular outbreak. And if we have a system like that, where we can respond locally to local events, and it's like what we do with other.
But hold on a minute, but there's been a big political backlash at the idea of having local lockdowns and local restrictions. Is there any evidence that they serve any particular purpose?
Well, I wouldn't be talking about local lockdowns. You're talking about a local test and trace system where you go in and you have really good contact tracing. A few people affected in the outbreak who haven't yet fallen ill, and those who've fallen ill, of course, will have to isolate for a while. And what we could do to improve the situation is to give those people a very strong incentive, like making sure they don't suffer financially, or even pay them to self-isolate.
Other countries do that, yes, properly.
Other countries have done that really rather successfully, we talk about Taiwan. Well, they've done that in New Zealand, and that's a pretty democratic sort of country. I think the public would buy that. I think the public and local authorities would be reasonably happy as well, because it wouldn't be putting a great sort of blast of restriction on their local economies.
I would sooner pay people their full salary to self-isolate when they're either at risk of having the virus or we know they've got the virus, than paying 2 or 3 million people to still be on furlough when they're perfectly healthy and should be able to be back at work right now. I mean, that's the choice. I mean, it's a small price to pay, isn't it? What do you make of the fact that the same people who are predicting this third wave are the same ones who, it's the same people every time. They predicted that we would have spikes from bank holidays last year when people went to the beach and from protest marches and things. They predicted we'd have it when schools returned, when pubs reopened outdoors, when they opened indoors. The SAGE modelling, there are 5 scenarios. Even the best case, there's some of them are just have these huge big spikes, even in the middle of July, with 4,000 or 5,000 people dying a day, and then you've got these spikes, these lower ones, and where we are right now, despite the Indian variant, despite all the reopening continuing, we are still below their best case scenario. When I say below, I mean we're better than, in terms of the number of cases, in terms of the number of infections, number of hospitalizations and deaths. It does seem to me that the same doomsters and gloomsters are going to come out and predict again and again that things are going to go terribly wrong every time we have more freedoms back. I mean, when they've been so wrong so many times, should we really be listening to them about this?
Well, we have to hear what they say, but whether we listen to them is a different matter. There are different views on this, and there have been some quite acrimonious debates among the scientists. I think one of the problems, as I see it, as somebody who's been involved in looking at outbreaks, food poisoning outbreaks, for example, and outbreaks of other infections over the years, is that local controls usually work well if you have a good local system for doing it. And I ran a public inquiry about this, about a big outbreak years ago, and the local outbreak control team was excellent in that particular outbreak. The problem was that the bug had got really a grip on a population before they knew it even started. Yeah. But we have good systems in the UK to do that, And they're the systems that we're now should be moving towards local control of local outbreaks with COVID, just as we do with all the other bugs that we have, norovirus and and flu and all those things. Traditionally, we've been quite good at it, not as good as we could have been, but pretty good. And we should be putting all our efforts into that because we've now got case numbers right down, where those sort of systems really should work very effectively without damaging ordinary life for ordinary folk who are really not going to be infected with the virus. And also the damage it's done to the NHS is almost gone beyond.
Oh, yes. I mean, again, we will be dealing with that for decades to come. Professor Hugh Pennington, always so good to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.